Hey there. So, in today's video, I came across this article which I thought was very interesting. And essentially, this article is How Will AI Affect the Global Workforce? I think it's very pertinent because we're starting to see a lot of questions that are coming around this. And so I thought that this article by Goldman was very timely. Um, Quite a few things. It's very US focused. A lot of the insights that are out here are obviously, they seem to be from a larger report, but um, obviously the free access is only to this article. So there are like some things which are touched upon very lightly, but I think what I will do is that there are similar articles which are being put out by a lot of the competing banks. So what I'll do is I will read them, summarize them, and also add that flavor as well on top of this. Um, Okay, so starting out, what are they saying? AI adoption is expected to have modest, relatively temporary impact on employment levels. This is obviously also a bank view. If you look at what some of the folks on Less Wrong are saying, or some of the stuff that's been put out by, uh, Dwarkesh on his podcast, you will see that these forecasts are quite flipped. It's also if you think about what Vinod Khosla is saying, he's essentially saying like 80% of the jobs will be done by AI at some point in time. They might be augmented or automated, but they will be done by AI in the next 5 to 10 years. So you obviously have extremes on both sides. Unemployment will increase by half percentage point during the AI transition period as displaced workers seek new positions, find nothing new in there. 2.5% of US employment would be at risk. The reason that I have this red line is that it says that display 6 to 7%. So if it's widely adopted, so you'll start seeing that these ranges actually across the paper, they are quite different. But they start out at 2.5%, they go up to 6 to 7%, and then eventually it goes much higher towards the bottom half. So I think we'll get to that in a bit. Finally, he says that computer programmers, or accountants, auditors, legal administrative assistants, and customer service representatives, these are the jobs which are most at risk. So again, nothing new there. This is something that we're starting to see. So OpenAI, Anthropic, all of the data around the usage that they're actually putting out, all of that is focused around these bits as well. Um, this chart was interesting because essentially, if you look at it, you have this clustering here, which is for firms which are anywhere between one um, to 149 employees, and you see that the adoption rates are much lower as compared to firms which are larger, which is 250 plus. If you think about all the large corporations, and especially those where a lot of us would be working, those are essentially here, whereas these are more of the startups. Surprisingly, this is also a bit flipped because what you would expect is, and we don't know what this, who are the survey respondents, but you would actually more expect that smaller companies would be using AI a lot more and the adoption would be much higher as compared to the case here, which is with a lot of the um, 250 plus employee organizations having this adoption rate. Um, when we move on, essentially, he says that the labor saving technologies typically increases US joblessness rates by 0.3 percentage points with every 1 percentage point gain in technology driven productivity growth. And then they actually sort of say that, however, the impact is usually fleeting and it only lasts about 2 years. I think the reason I highlighted 2 years is that if you think about any um, sort of disruption in the economic cycle, it usually is a 2 year phase. Obviously, there's aftermath. So if you think about the 2008 recession, uh, it didn't end immediately after 2 years, but 2 years was when it was sort of at its peak, when you had a lot of the bigger announcements happening, a lot of the fallouts happening, and then obviously there was an aftermath or a domino effect which was playing out. But the bulk of that pain was 2 years. So I think that's like a sort of a good way to think about this point that Briggs and Dong are making here. How will AI impact labor productivity? So what they say is that around 15% when fully adopted and incorporated into regular production, that would translate into a half percentage point rise in the unemployment rate above its trend during the AI transition period. Though that impact could be higher if AI adoption is more front-loaded than they assume. And I think this is sort of true essentially because the way that AI is being adopted is more of a cautious approach. It's a wait and watch approach. There's pilots that are being conducted by organizations, but there's very few examples where companies have gone all in and become AI first organizations. Even though surprisingly, um, JP Morgan actually did announce that they want to be an AI first mega bank just today or yesterday. Um, Then essentially what they're saying is that the 6 to 7% estimate for job displacement from AI is the team's baseline assumption. So this goes back to the original point here, which is where they said 2.5, then they went to 6 to 7, which was the baseline. And then in that same paragraph, essentially what they are saying is that it could be as high as 14%. So that's about twice of their baseline assumptions. And then a 14% disruption of jobs across an economy as large as the US is quite significant if you start putting all of that into context. What could AI mean for unemployment? The first is if AI capabilities advance to a point where human input becomes redundant for many types of production, leading to persistent structural unemployment. And I think this is one of the things that is covered in and it's the fear of a lot of the folks that are working in this space for because what they are essentially propagating is that we might reach a stage where you would need some form of universal basic income. The other parallel thought is that if essentially people do not have jobs, then how is there going to be consumption? Because there is no expenditure that is happening. What might happen is that you might have a few folks who are very affluent and they continue to be rich, and then you have the rest of the economy, which essentially does not have jobs or they have to do work for very, very low wages. I think this is the point which made me really happy, which is this outcome is unlikely. So immediately after sort of doing this scare tactic, they just go ahead and they say that it's unlikely. And they go ahead to say that approximately 60% of US workers today are in occupations that didn't exist in 1940, implying that more than 85% of employment growth since then has been from technology-driven job creation. I think alternative view to this point, when you were in the 1940s, right? Essentially, let's say you were a stenographer, you had a computer come in, and essentially you had to move from that particular job, and you started becoming like an executive assistant potentially. You were working on Word documents and so on. The problem now is that AI is essentially taking the human component out of the entire equation. So what you have is that technology as a factor of production is actually trying to eliminate humans or labor as a factor of production. And that's where the challenge lies, which I feel that this paper sort of kills that argument, but that is a very valid argument that we all should be thinking about, and that's also something that um, I'll touch upon in subsequent videos where I'll actually go through one of those papers that talks about that particular element. Then again, this is highlighted in orange predictions that technology will reduce the need for human labor, have a long history but a poor track record, which I do agree with because um, this is something that we have seen. I don't know if that applies to AI or not, because essentially, when you had the printing press, people were afraid. When you had, let's say, the computer revolution, people were afraid. When you went through the industrial revolution, again, people were afraid. So I do completely align with this, but at the same time, I would also like to keep that lens on that this time is slightly different from the previous revolutions that we as a civilization have gone through. Frictional unemployment is not unique to AI and occurs during most periods of rapid technological change. And this I agree with because again, like if you were, let's say, someone who's a who was not a factory worker and was doing something which was completely unrelated, and you had to go through the Industrial Revolution, you would almost be completely against it. And then obviously there is going to be that friction, but then eventually, if you do not jump onto that bandwagon and you do not align with that particular centuries or those particular decades type of occupations and employment, then essentially you will go into a situation where you are largely unemployed. Um, is AI already causing job losses? Executives from the tech and finance sector say that they are seeing efficiency gains from Gen AI, which I think is also factually incorrect because there's like different papers, and I do not recall the exact sources, but it's either a McKinsey study or it's an MIT paper, which essentially says that only about 2 to 3% of executives are actually seeing gains from efficiency gains from Gen AI. So this assertion, and that's why I have this big question mark, is probably not as correct as the way that it's sort of put out here. Low adoption is limiting the overall labor market impacts from AI. Found no significant statistical correlation between AI exposure and a host of economic measures, including job growth, unemployment rates, job finding rates, layoff rates, growth in weekly hours, or average hourly earnings growth. I would like to say there's something profound here, but probably not. Um, what industries are being affected by AI? So employment growth in industries such as marketing, consulting. So they give an example. So these are the ones here: marketing, graphic design, office admin, telephone, call centers, computer systems, software publishers. And what they're saying is that the employment has fallen below trend amid reports of reduced labor demand due to AI-related efficiency gains. Um, ChatGPT was released somewhere around, I mean, if you think about a usable version, which was public beta, which started getting used, I think that was somewhere around 2022, potentially 22, 23, and that's when you see the peak and then you start seeing the decline. Now, that is also coincident with the fact that if you look from 2020 to 2022, at least in the case of marketing, graphic design, office admin, all of these have seen a significant uptick in the number of jobs, right? So there was obviously massive hiring after this dip here. And then these declines here, while they're being attributed to I do feel that it's also a result of the overhiring that may have happened for these specific roles. In the case of call centers, here I do feel that there is a steeper decline that has happened despite some amount of hiring happening here. Likewise, in the case of computer systems design and software publishers, you see more steeper declines. But then what is missing here is essentially if you look at hiring for AI job roles, that is on a significant uptake. So some of the roles from computer systems design and software publishers essentially are being reworded, or the keywords are changing and the job description is changing, and that actually aligns with the point above, which was that a lot of the roles um, that people are in today did not even exist when we went through the previous transition. And I think that's the point here that they're trying to make, that overhiring during the pandemic, tech's employment share has now fallen below its pre-pandemic trend, a pattern probably related to AI automation. So I think again, like if you think about this, which is tech as a whole, or if you look at software engineering and you just look at AI job postings, I know that chart is not here, but I can probably pull that data out separately. The AI job posting data essentially shows that it's on an uptick as compared to tech employment, which is sort of declining. And this is also a function of, if you think about all the bank companies, they essentially overhired during the pandemic as well, and they are also on a cost cutting um, measure. A lot of them also are hyperscalers. So hyperscalers are companies that lease a lot of space in data centers, and they need a lot of capex to sort of be able to make sure that they are making those investments as they are leasing the space at one end, but then they're also going and building their own data centers. So they need a lot more capex, and one way to do that is obviously that they are starting to get some of those savings from labor costs. So far, young tech workers appear to be disproportionately affected. Unemployment among 20 to 30-year-olds in tech-exposed occupations has risen by almost 3 percentage points. Not blaming Gen Z, but their behavior also has a role to play in this. Since the start of 2025, notably higher than for their same age counterparts in other trades and for overall tech workers as well. This corroborates anecdotal reports that Gen AI is contributing to hiring headwinds facing recent college grads in technology. Um, s- so I think the other thing here is this particular chart, and what this chart is showing is that the percentage of total employment, um, where are the gains coming? What you do see is that the in terms the max that you could potentially gain is 2.5%, um, which is still a fairly modest estimate in my opinion. Um, what jobs are most at risk for AI automation in the future? So then they essentially give the list, which we did speak about earlier, and then they say those at least risk of being displaced are air traffic controllers, chief executives, radiologists, pharmacists, residential advisors, photographers, and members of the clergy. And I wrote here because if you think about these roles, right, these roles in themselves had very specialized um, limited individuals working there. So in some cases, you also have to think from the cost of deploying an AI. So the cost of deploying an AI to replace some of these roles um, would probably be higher than actually just paying a human to do the work. So unless the cost of AI eventually treads towards a nominal or a notional amount, most of these jobs are likely to remain safe. So yeah, with that, I'll end this video. If you like this, if you have recommendation on what I should read and review next, please feel free to drop it in the comments. If you like this video, please do like, please do share, and please do subscribe. It means a lot. I'm really trying to build this channel out, so any help that you could lend would be very appreciated. So until next time, thanks so much. Thank you.